3. Death of Billy the Kid. In March 1881, a deputy United States Marshal by the name of John W. Poe arrived in the booming mining camp of White Oaks. He had been sent to New Mexico by the Cattlemen's Association of the Texas Panhandle. Cattle King Charles Goodnight, being the president of the association, had selected Mr. Poe as the proper man to put a stop to the stealing of Panhandle cattle by Billy the Kid and gang. After the Kid's escape, Pat Garrett went to White Oaks and deputized John W. Poe to assist him in rounding up the Kid. From now on, Mr. Poe made trips into the mountains, trying to locate the young outlaw. The Kid's best friends argued that he was nobody's fool and would not remain in the United States, and the old Mexico border was so near. They didn't realize that little Cupid was shooting his tender heart full of love darts straight to the heart of the pretty little Miss Dulcinea del Toboso at Fort Sumner. Early in June, Pat Garrett received a letter from an acquaintance from the name of Brazil in Fort Sumner, advising him that the Kid was hanging around there. Garrett at once wrote Brazil to meet him about dark on the night of July 13th at the mouth of the Taiban arroyo before Fort Sumner. Now the sheriff took his trusted deputy, John W. Poe, and rode to Roswell on the Rio Pecos. There they were joined by one of Mr. McGarrett's fearless cowboy deputies, Pete McKinnie, who had been raised near Uvalde, Texas. Together the three law enforcers rode up the river towards Fort Sumner, a distance of 80 miles. They arrived at the mouth of the Taiban arroyo an hour after dark on July 13th, but Brazil was not able to meet them. The night was spent sleeping in the saddle blankets. The next morning, Garrett sent Mr. Poe, who was a stranger in the country, and for that reason would not be suspicioned, into Fort Sumner, 5 miles north, to find out what he could on the sly about the Kid's presence. In Fort Sumner, he was to go to Sunnyside, 6 miles north, to interview a merchant by the name of Mr. Rudolph. Then, when the moon was rising, to meet Garrett and McKinney on La Punta de la Glorieta, about 4 miles north of Fort Sumner. They went to find out anything of importance about the Kid. John W. Poe met his two companions at the appointed place, and they rode into Fort Sumner. It was about 11 o'clock, and the moon was shining brightly when the officers rode in an old orchard and concealed their horses. Now the three continued afoot to the home of Pete Maxwell, a wealthy stockman who was both a friend of Garrett and the Kid. He lived in a long, one-story adobe building, which had been the U.S. officers' quarters when the soldiers were stationed there. The house faced south and had a wide covered porch in front. The grassy front yard was surrounded by a picket fence. As Pat Garrett had courted his wife and married her in this town, he knew every foot of the ground, even to Pete Maxwell's private bedroom. On reaching the picket gates and near the corner room, which Pete Maxwell always occupied, Garrett told his two deputies to wait there until after he had a talk with the half-breed Pete Maxwell. The night being hot, Pete Maxwell's door stood wide open, and Garrett walked in. A short time previous, Billy the Kid had arrived from the sheep camp out in the hills. Back of the Maxwell's home lived a Mexican servant who was a warm friend to the Kid. Here Billy the Kid always found late newspapers, placed here by loving hands for his special benefits. This old servant had gone to bed. The Kid lit a lamp and pulled off his coat and boots. Now he glanced over the papers to see if his name was mentioned. Finding nothing of interest in the papers, he asked the old servant to get up and cook him some supper, as he was very hungry. Getting up, the servant told him that there was no meat in the house. The Kid remarked that he would go and get some from Pete Maxwell. Now he picked up a butcher knife from the table and cut the meat with, and started barefooted and bareheaded. The Kid passed within a few feet of the end of the porch where sat John W. Poe and Pete McKinnie. The latter had raised up when his spur rattled, which attracted the Kid's attention. At the same moment, Mr. Poe stood up a small open gateway leading to the street from the end of the porch. They supposed the man coming towards him, only partly dressed, was a servant, or possibly Pete Maxwell. The Kid had pulled his pistol, and so had John Poe, who by that time was almost within arm's reach of the Kid. With the pistol pointing at Poe, and at the same time asking in Spanish, "Yes?" He was up. He backed into Pete Maxwell's room. He repeated the above question several times. On entering the room, Billy the Kid walked in with a few feet of Pat Garrett, who was sitting on Maxwell's bed, and asked, "Who are they, Pete?" Now discovering that the man on Pete's bed, the Kid, was raised, pistol pointing towards the bed, began backing across the room. Pete Maxwell whispered to the sheriff, "That's him, Pat." By the time the Kid had tried to streak back into the moonlight through the south window, asking, "Kidus, who's that?" Garrett raised his pistol and fired, then cocked the pistol again, and it went off accidentally and putting a hole in the ceiling, or wall. Now the sheriff sprang out the door where stood the two deputies with pistols drawn. Soon after, Pete Maxwell ran out and came very near getting a ball in Poe's pistol. Garrett struck the pistol upward, saying, "Don't shoot, Maxwell!" The lighted candle was secured from the mother of Pete Maxwell, who occupied the nearby room, and the dead body, Billy the Kid, was found stretched out on his back, with a bullet wound to his breast, just above his heart. At the right hand lay a Colt .41 caliber pistol, at his left, a butcher knife. Now the native people began to collect, many of them being warm friends of the Kids. Garrett allowed them to take the body across the street to the carpenter shop, where it was laid out on a bench. Then lighted candles were placed around what remains of what once were the bravest and coolest young outlaw who ever trod the face of the earth. Next day, this, once mother's darling, was buried by the side of his chum, Tom O'Fallard, in the old military cemetery. He was killed at midnight, July 14th, 1881, being just 21 years, 7 months, and 21 days of age, and had killed 21 men, not including Indians, which he said couldn't count as human beings.